spaces, such as malls and transit stops. And so I see a disconnect between the way people want to use public spaces and the way public spaces are regulated for those uses. So these are a few examples of city laws that occur in the state of California that are regulating activities in public spaces. These are actually fairly benign activities, but for some reason it needs to be regulated. Here's another example of the way that our sidewalks are regulated. These are street signs that occur on C Street between 5th Avenue and 6th Avenue at the trolley stop. And for all the signs you see here, there's about 3 or 4 repetitions of these signs that occur on that one city block. So it's pretty excessive. So I became curious to see how people were addressing these conditions or adjusting to these conditions. And so I was observing the way people began to adapt uses to public spaces. So for example, people would turn blank building facades into canvases for creative expression, or the sidewalk could become a platform for a protest. So the Washington Street Skate Park is a good example of this action. So the PCH, the underpass of that, had been turned into a permanent skate park. And so I was realizing that all these activities were happening in residual spaces, and it became important for me to understand other residual spaces that could foster these public activities. So here we have interstitial spaces that occur between buildings, and it's essentially more of a utilitarian use, but I was curious to see if there's ways that these interstitial spaces could foster other public access. Though they're not public spaces, maybe they could become a hybrid of public and private. And so here's another example of indeterminate spaces, and I'm defining indeterminate as being spaces that are loosely, spatially and programmatically defined. So say a sidewalk could support activities of various kinds. It spills onto the street. So the spaces are loosely defined in terms of its... So the last one is negative space, and this one is determined by the roofscapes and the undulation that the roofscapes create. So I'm looking at it as a way of a different landscape, or a new landscape that happens in the urban environment that could be engaged for, again, public access. So roof pockets and such as that. So now I have my residual spaces I've identified, I have my activities I've identified, and I'm interested in coupling those two things to see how they could actually manifest themselves into architectural interventions, essentially creating the idea of a park, but in more of an urban application, tucked into these small niches. So these are 3 potential formulas that could be derived from that. For example, a straightforward one would be a sidewalk with green space becomes a place for a picnic. And here the components are interchangeable, but that when they would be inserted into the site, they would become specific to that place and become site-specific. So understanding that residual spaces actually occur in any built environment, they're fairly ubiquitous, and the program is loosely defined. These 2 elements could really be cited in any city, and so it's then the city that gives it its specificity. And so you could have these events happen in any city, and actually it could be virtually connected.